whether they are building a brand new facility or simply updating existing workflows, broadcasters have more technology options for news production than ever. Today we gather a panel of experts to discuss the impact of automation, IP routing, and cloud-based tools, and where they see news operations heading into the future. Joining me today are Stephen Bach, Sales Manager, News Vertical for Amagi; Jim Beam, VP of Engineering and Operations, WTTG, Fox Television Stations. Down at the end, Jeff Birch, VP of Engineering, CBS Television Stations. And I saved Fabian for last because he has the longest title. Fabian Westerwell, Executive Director, Media and Technology Operations for Disney DMED Tech Production Operations. And for the audience, we like to make this experience as interactive as possible. So feel free to ask questions of our panelists, which we'll address towards the end of the session. Let's start with Jeff. How have improvements in connectivity and automation software changed the control room workflows for the CBS stations?
I think it's probably started right at the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of the vendors upgraded their software and let us operate remotely. They gave us more features than we ever had before. So as opposed to having just a computer assist in the control room, the computer's basically running the control room these days with one person sitting there riding shotgun over the top of it. The connectivity has been key. You know, we've seen the speeds that all the vendors can provide to us increase, 4, 5, 6-fold over the last couple of years. So you can do a lot more with a lot less. You can see more sources. You can control more things in real time. So overall, it's allowed us to not only remote things better, but also use less resources to accomplish the same production values that we used to do 2 years ago.
And when you say one person in a control room, is that consistent across all your newscasts, or does that vary, by day part?
Well, today the CBS O&Os run a director and a TD in all the control rooms. The goal is to get down to a single operator in that control room, which will be across the board by early next year.
Okay. And when you talk about automation, do you have any other capabilities besides just automating within the station? What about, handling the functions of one station from another site?
With the latest version of software that we got from our vendor, I could light up the control room in Los Angeles, but I could actually run that control room from the same console in New York. So it's a great DR capacity for us. And I can do that across any of my stations now. I can mix and match the physical control point with the physical location of the control room.
And how long have you had that capability?
Probably about a year now. We finally got it ironed out and we can use it. During pandemic, San Francisco used it almost exclusively.
And has there been a big improvement in connectivity that's made that possible? Or?
Absolutely, okay. Yes. The dependability of the connectivity, which I've been an open critic about, it's no secret. Plus the speeds of the connectivity have gotten better, which has allowed us to be able to mix and match like that. Okay,
thanks. Jim, your station moved to a brand new building last year. How has that move changed both your studio presentation and your workflows in the newsroom?
Well, the studio has gotten much more graphic intensive. We had, in our old building, our old set, we had some hanging monitors, and we had a monitor wall in the background. But the new studio is just layers of monitors and LED monitor walls in the background. A lot of the things move around, and so what that means is now the producers have to program all of these monitors. So Fox television stations, our graphic systems they're built around Chiron, no secret. We're hubbed out of Florida for our graphics. And that means that we have a system of templated tools for producers to use to put the graphics into the rundowns. And so the same tools they're using for lower thirds, full screens, et cetera, they're now using to program the LED monitor wall backgrounds, the triple hanging vert, the quad monitor wall and whether they want it together or whether they want them split at the moment. And it really gives us a great deal of flexibility as they run through the program. When you could do weather, and then you can change what's in those monitors and do, have it augment the story you're working on. And then what's really helpful is you can do a totally different show. One corner of our studio, we're doing Good Day DC, and it's got a nice cityscape background, and the graphics are beautiful. Later on in the day, we'll do a court show, court program out of there, and you'll look like you're in a law library, and a totally different look, talent standing in the same spot, and so that's part of it. In terms of the 2110, I won't go too deep into the technology there, but it just gives us a flexibility that we didn't have before to reconfigure things. We can reconfigure control rooms for different programs. We can, if we have a equipment failure, we can easily move a control room, move a whole program to a different control room. It makes things much more flexible for us.
And as you mentioned, your plan is based on 2110 routing, IP switches. Did that change the basic workflows for your news personnel very much, or were their systems able to stay the same?
Not so much for the newsroom. No, the cameras are still very similar. The switcher, it's a 2110 switcher, but if you're a TD that was working on the older switchers, you're going to be very familiar. The switcher's going to be nearly identical in operation for you. The robotics is very similar. So from a technical side, it looks very much the same to the production people. The newsroom, like I said, the producers have a bit more work to do, keeping up with all the graphics. And then we've been talking about the studio. In the newsroom itself, it's a whole nother set. The newsroom is a full set. And we have, depending on which way you look, and we have a number of different, you can look this way, and you've got our TOC in the background, and its monitor wall. And you can see all the different remotes back there. You turn another way, we've got a floor-to-ceiling monitor wall. And in fact, that's the newsroom layout now has allowed us to launch a new program that we do from 3 to 4 every day now, called the DMV zone, or District Maryland, Virginia. The DMV as in TMZ zone, where we roam the newsroom, talk to writers, talk to producers, go down the street at street level. We're on the 6th, 7th, 8th floor of a high-rise building. We can go down the street level. We can talk to people on the street. So it's given us a lot of flexibility there. By the way, Fox owns TMZ, so it's okay.
It's a good time. And it's not the Department of Motor Vehicles in New Jersey, which is not entertaining for anyone. By the way, Jeff talked about how much they use automation to drive the newscast across CBS stations. How about WTTG? How heavily do you rely on robotics and automation software during newscast?
We've been using ELC for a good percentage of our news production for probably 10 years. And we continue to. We're probably doing just under 90 hours of news and other live programming a week now. And I would say at least 60 hours of it is all Sony ELC. Some of the programming we do in the morning with our Good Day show it's a little bit more spontaneous, and it feels a little bit better. That programming feels better. It lends itself a little more to, having an audio operator and a robotic camera operator in the control room. In terms of the like the robotics, it's a newer version of the same robotic system we have. So it still needs we were talking about this before, 10 or 12 years ago when when the big markets went to robotic cameras, it took us from having to need one person behind each camera to one person behind the whole system, right? One person can now run all of your cameras, but you still need that one person. And we find that really we still do need that one person to be able to touch up the shots, keep things centered, and the same person can also shade the cameras.
Okay, thanks. Jim just went through a new facility build. Fabian is in the process of helping design a new building for ABC, a new broadcast center downtown. Can you talk about your move to virtualized workflows, an ongoing thing that ABC News has been going through for several years, and how that informs the design of the new broadcast center?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with, as Jim and Jeff mentioned, flexibility is really the key for us, and that's, I think, the first kind of theme I start with. And it's all about not making the building the central part of the actual technology, but making the building just another place where we produce content. So for us, we have so many shows and so much content to create, and we also have the bureaus to factor in and various locations throughout the world. So we really took an approach for this new facility to look at really, you mentioned virtualization, but it's not just that. It's looking at the core technology being a centralized kind of environment. So what does our compute look like? What does our storage look like? What does our networking look like in order to create a software-defined architecture on which we can build all kinds of different workflows? So that was the first step, to really make sure that we have a really solid plan in place there. And that means that for both on the studio production side, we're looking to take all of our production software and graphics and solutions, really anything that we're running, and trying to run that on dedicated hardware. So what can we do with in working with our vendors to figure out what solutions we can build from a compute perspective to run all of these different solutions and software pieces on top of it? What are we doing on the storage front and again on the networking front to enable that? And the reality that we're trying to get to is that we can run any studio from any control room. A lot of that we're already doing, but the traditional limitations have been that a lot of those solutions are very dedicated hardware based, and they have to be locked in between those studios and control rooms. So again, the philosophy is to decouple all of that and be able to run any control room from any run any studio from any control room, and also run controls from studios and of course in the other bureaus and locations. And as you mentioned, my long title, we're now part of DMET Technology across Disney. So this is not just on the news front, but this building is going to be shared between news and sports and local news. So there's a lot of discussion and thought going into how do we bring those pieces together to make sure that sharing it happens as effectively as possible. And so the other part of this, I mentioned the live production piece, is the pre-production, editing, and news gathering aspects of it. So how do we enable our producers to have a similar experience where that work that they're doing is decoupled from the hardware and the location where they're at? And that all, for us, is really focused on VDI. So being able to have, again, that compute centralized, they can log in from anywhere in the world, really, via a VDI session and get access to the software solutions they need to do the work at any point in time. And so it's not for us, for example, them being able to work from home. It's them being able to work from anywhere. And so it doesn't matter if they're in the building in one seat, or if they're in a control room, or if they're somewhere else, they're logging back into the same exact session that they need for the work they're trying to do.
And when you say VDI, you mean virtual desktop infrastructure using one of your data centers? Is that the methodology?
Yeah, so I think we're going to get into a little bit later on what we're talking about with cloud and so on, but that's where I come back to the centralized compute, storage, and networking. We're building out a very robust shared environment where we can run not just those VDI sessions, but obviously also all of our production solutions. So that's baked into that. And
Okay.
Again, from a networking perspective, there's a lot of important considerations because traditionally, if you have a editing environment, right? It's very much air-gapped from the rest of what we're doing across the plant, and that limits us when we're doing multimedia production or multi-distribution point production for digital content, things like that. So the idea is to make that one environment, bring that all together, and so it's built by us in a way that works to align those pieces.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, can you talk a little, obviously, Amagi has got a lot of initial customers and traction in play out from the cloud, and you guys are moving into more of the news production realm. Can you talk about what some of your customers are doing as they move from traditional news production to cloud-based workflows?
Sure. Yeah, so Amagi is entirely cloud-based master control. So I think in North America, most of the applications for our customers are for connected TV and maybe their owned and operated OTT apps, or range of fast destinations. What really is a theme for us the last couple of years has been advancements in live and graphics in particular. The first generation of streaming channels was largely, maybe just kind of clip reels of recorded content kind of stitched together, or maybe it was a very rudimentary playlist of the live newscast, or maybe a slightly delayed newscast, and then replays of that until you were back live on the air. And now our clients are doing, much more sophisticated scheduling for these fast channels. And one thing that has really been a theme is the ability to go live at any moment. Meredith mentioned it on the first panel, but giving tools to pretty much anybody. Our master control software is operated through a web browser. So if you're an operator and you've got credentials, you can basically turn a channel on live. So a lot of our local news customers are using that to broaden their coverage. When maybe they're not in a live simulcast, they're extending events, maybe covering political rallies or campaign speeches, things of that nature, in their entirety. Whereas otherwise it would just be a soundbite on the newscast. Graphics also a really big part of our story these days. We just launched CoinDesk TV, for example, this week, and CoinDesk is a totally virtual channel. They've got a very small studio here in Manhattan, but we're adding all of the graphics in the cloud. We're adding a ticker of crypto prices at the bottom and headlines from their website. And these are things that you don't need any expensive Viz or Chiron engine on in a facility to do it. You're basically building web pages. So we provide APIs to connect to the playlist, and you can have a rundown visually on the screen. So these are we're seeing a lot of really creative approaches here, especially in FAST. If you guys watch FAST, you see it whenever you don't see an ad, you see Slate. We'll be right back. So we're seeing live HTML graphics with stock quotes or sports scores or odds or things like that. So really nice creative use of graphics. And then the last thing I was going to say is kind of bringing it more in with this group. Like I said, we're cloud-based master control, and it's operated through a web browser, right? So if you're a technical director in a facility and you're trying to switch shots, maybe take something live or switch cameras or hit break, you're often, hitting a virtual button on a website, right? One of the big themes of our work the last few months has been tying that to physical switchboards, right? So using APIs, so you can actually take the switchboard that the technical director is accustomed to hitting and mapping that to master control in the cloud, which I think is going to be, a very important signal of convergence of these two worlds.
Okay, thanks. Jeff, probably the place where the CBS stations that are the most in the cloud is with your OTT product, streaming, and the kind of integration that Stephen's talking about, making cloud tools work with maybe a traditional interface like a switcher panel. Is that something that does that resonate with you, or is the staff that's producing your streaming products? Are they actually comfortable doing stuff on with a mouse and a keyboard?
At the risk of not being politically correct, it's probably a generational thing. The younger staff who hasn't sat in front of a switcher, sat in front of an audio console, is very comfortable with a mouse and a keyboard, or maybe a touch screen. The more veteran staff who did TV the old-fashioned way, like us dinosaurs, they don't take to it as easily. So it's a balancing act between who's actually going to run it and what we can provide for them. At the end of the day, we're trying to give them the best of both so that anybody can sit down and put a show on regardless of what you're used to doing. Going forward, I see less and less traditional work surfaces in the control rooms. I see less and less traditional control rooms. There are plenty of folks out there today that they've got a mouse, a keyboard, they had a couple of monitors, and they're in somebody's office. And they can cut a show with that and do it very well. And I see that's where it's ultimately going. Now, my brethren in network news would probably disagree, saying if you're doing an election night, you still need 120 inputs on the switcher, 120 inputs on the audio console, and I need a separate person in front of each one of those devices because the show's moving so quickly. That may well be true, but for everyday bread and butter news, I see it slowly going away from the traditional control room.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to explore that notion of the control room in the cloud a little bit more later. Fabian, I wanted to ask you when you're speccing out this new facility, designing the workflows, what are some of the key pain points in today's news production process that you're looking to address?
Yeah, I mean, some of it I touched on earlier is that kind of dedicated hardware problem, right, that we're all trying to get away from, where we're then not as flexible being able to use those different studios and control rooms. So that's one. We're also in this new facility adding a lot more flexible studio spaces because there's more and more production, live production, et cetera, going on. So that's one area of focus. Then there's the pre-production editing and graphics creation, content creation in general. And we did a lot of work over the last few years doing internal research, talking to our users, having some integrators obviously working with us on the overall building. And there are some key things and themes that came out of that we're right now really focused on. So one is around our media lifecycle and how content is being acquired and brought into our environment, into our ecosystem, how it's being distributed. We have come from a more traditional approach of having a large PAM environment, and for our content and our shows on the network news side, everything lands there. And then on the fringes of that, getting content from affiliates, from social media, from all kinds of different places, is using different applications depending on the need, and that's evolved over time, and so there's some fracturing there. And on the distribution side, it's similar, getting content back out to different partners and things like that. So obviously we want the right solutions for the right needs there, but we really wanted to take a look at that and make that a much more unified ecosystem so that we can have a piece of content go through that entire life cycle and have it be accessible to all the different stakeholders that need it in an efficient way. So there's challenges there, of course, with accessibility and rights management and things like that we're working through, but from a software perspective, that's a big area of focus. And then that all needs to tie into the newsroom, what traditionally has been called the newsroom computer system or computer environment. And that's, for us, really a big focus on story-centric. So how do we create a organizational method around what I just said about the media? Well, for us, it's all about the stories. What are the big stories that ABC News is covering? How do we make that a unified experience, again, for all the stakeholders to be able to contribute content into that, know who's working on it? The big questions are always, who else is working on that story that I'm working on? And what is all the best video for that story? So that has to tie in really well together. And for us, the newsroom system and the MAM is one unified approach, really. It can't really be separated. On the back end, there's different considerations there, but that's a big piece of it. And then the third big item is order management. And what we mean by that is, how do we track the work that's happening behind the scenes against these stories and also against the productions that we're making in an effective way to make it really better for the producers and the content creators and the news gathering folks. So if you're ordering a graphic, how does that flow attached to the story you're working on and create visibility around who else is maybe interested in that, and then obviously tracking that through the next steps of that graphic being created and so on. So we have order management in different pockets, but we are looking to bring that together and make that much more effective and integrated.
And you guys actually wrote some of your own software to handle some of that planning and tracking functionality, right?
Yeah, we have some of that now. The biggest focus, like I said, is really integrating the media piece of that a lot more into how we look at this, and so that's right now our largest focus.
Okay, thanks. Jim, I'm curious, when you were designing the new facility and looking at your workflows, what changes did you make to handle multi-platform production better? You know, there was a lot of conversation about that this morning, about versioning of stories, feeding all these different platforms, and you know, when you started with a clean slate with this building, what were some of the things that are different in terms of how you feed the digital side?
Well, a lot of that comes from Fox Corporate. We have a whole large group that handle a lot of the OTT and stuff. But no, we have the ability to do you know, multiple outputs, and with 2110, the flexibility there, we can feed them through different encoders. So that the same programming, or in some cases different programming, can go out, you know, over multiple paths. I think I've got to sit down and do a drawing of all the different paths. I'm having trouble these days keeping in my head just you know, how many different paths the signal takes. It used to be that the signal just went out over the antenna, and of course now we are. Some of it gets encoded locally with our ATSC encoder. Some gets sent off and is encoded with the ATSC 3.0 encoder at the Lighthouse station. And then we have a couple of different other encoders that are encoding the signal, and then the OTT, you know, it multicasts out from there to the OTT providers.
Okay. Anything different on the studio side to support multi-platform? I know you were talking about all the different spaces you have, and I was curious.
Well, and if we're talking about multi-platform, yeah, we have a separate, of course, we have a podcast area, and we have that, it's set up in one of our studios so that we can televise podcasts. But then we have a separate small control room that is just for streaming to the web. It's something that our Phoenix station started a few years ago and has been very successful with. And we dabbled with it in the old building. We did it kind of full time, or 5 or 6 hours a day for a little while, and then stopped. But we're getting ready to start again, to where you could have a producer slash anchor running the entire operation. So there's a switcher, there's audio capability, you have your Zoom capability, or you could bring in a live view remote and stream out programming it's not what's going out over our main channel, but it could be a hearing, it could be a, you know, we're not in LA, but it could be a car chase type of thing. Phoenix, I think, has taken some epic car chases from the LA market. But it's just dipping into the rich and wide variety of other material that's coming into our building that may not make the main newscast, or if it does, it'll make it in a 30-second nugget, and being able to, in real time, stream that back out over a web channel. So that's something that's coming up soon.
Okay, cool. You know, as we alluded to before, ABC has mostly pursued a private cloud strategy with what it's done, changing workflows from on-premise equipment. Disney obviously has a lot of data centers as a company. Fabian, when you look forward, how much do you see the network or other Disney properties using the public cloud in the future for news operations?
Yeah, and I would maybe recharacterize it a little bit there. I mean, so overall, Disney on the technology side does a lot of cloud, of course, across the board. And on the news front, what I was getting at is that we are in the new facility looking at, building private cloud if you want to phrase it that way, because of the reasons we need for live production right now. And also because it makes economical sense a lot of times, right? So at the same time, we're building that environment to be much more, very hybrid capable, right? And creating the architecture for that. The team that's responsible for that has really paid a lot of attention to, the infrastructure team has paid a lot of attention to building that out in a way that's very compatible with the public cloud environments, and that also we have the on and off ramps in a way that's really effective, so that we can then separate out decisions around how we're going to implement software from the hardware, but also make it agnostic in a sense between, does this need to run in our in the public cloud or in our private cloud? We'd like to kind of make that decision on a software by software basis, right? And also do the architecture design for the solutions we want to implement, do that on a per solution basis so that we don't have these barriers in the way. So as an example, right now our archive video system is all public cloud based, but obviously the on and off ramps are there to make that possible. For an archive, that's usually pretty straightforward. But if you get into live production, it gets more complicated, right? So how do you design the right environment to put the different pieces where you want them to be based on the various factors that are involved? That's definitely part of the design of the new facility too. So when we are looking now at these MAM newsroom systems, things like that, that's how we're approaching. We're looking at those systems and saying, what is the ideal way to build this? Maybe the media, especially the proxy, lives in S3. Maybe part of the compute also lives in AWS or Azure, but the core functionality might live on-prem in our data center. Same thing, we talked a little bit about fast channels, right? We have ABC News Live, our 24/7 channel. We have right now in the old building, it's all on-prem for the air chain of that. In the new facility, we're looking at options there. I mean, maybe the base playout the playout portion will be on-prem in our private data center. But the support applications and other contribution pieces that are part of that air chain might live in public cloud, right? So we're trying to abstract away those barriers that existed before to really make that hybrid approach functional and get the best of all the worlds.
Yeah, it sounds like applications that are live, you're more likely to run on private cloud right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's advancing pretty far as well. We've done testing across Disney on different approaches there, and it's not just us, but the industry is to a point where we can run full-fledged live multi-camera replay graphic heavy events and productions in public cloud if we wanted to. It's a matter of scale and how many we're doing, right? And right now, it just, for our scale, it doesn't make sense, for example, to really push so hard on that to move all of our live production in the cloud, just for commercial reasons and other things. But it's that traditional idea of let's scale into the cloud. So if we can have a baseline of X amount of productions per month, and now we want to burst into the cloud for the additional what's above that baseline, that's certainly of interest and something we're looking at. And I feel really optimistic about being able to make those kind of productions happen in the cloud now, really. So it's a positive sign. One other thing I'll touch on is multi-platform. Yeah, we do a ton of live streaming now, not just on ABC News Live as a 24/7 channel, but all these separate live events, right? And we're doing that today and have been for a while. And those are the areas where, to the earlier points, software applications and other things that are cloud-based, but also not just cloud, but we talked about the user interfaces. That's absolutely where that's all exploding, right? We're doing all of those things with certain dedicated applications that are really functional for certain parts of that. We mentioned HTML5 graphics, definitely something we're doing and using heavily for various things. So it's exciting where we are with this amount of flexibility that I'll come back to that word. It's a good time.
I mean, Stephen, how much live production today do you see your customers doing? And, can you maybe talk about some of the, it seems like there's still some question marks about scale and time when it comes to live in the cloud.
Well, increasingly news and live sports are a big part of the picture for our customers. Like I said, in North America at least, most of the applications for cloud-based master control have been for connected TV and OTT environments, but that's starting to shift. We do have some broadcast groups that are using cloud-based playout for traditional linear distribution or over the air, and I think that's a trend that we're going to see quite a bit going forward. The stability's there. I think Jeff mentioned that the connectivity your trust in it has grown quite a bit over the last over the last decade, would you say? Yeah.
Last couple of years, it hasn't
Yeah.
been that long.
Yeah. So, when I speak to, executives, CTOs, their confidence in using cloud for live production, for, live sporting events. We at Amagi, we do some soccer matches for organizations like DAZN. You cannot go down. And, there's now a level of resiliency on the public cloud. We build in a lot of redundancy here. And I think we've gotten to a spot that, the primary play out, will move to that, I think inevitably in the next decade or so.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of an anecdote. I did a webinar a week or two ago with, I think, some of your customers, and they're talking about a broad use of cloud, and they're talking about depending on the cloud and trusting the cloud. And somebody said, you can depend on the cloud, but you can't necessarily trust on it. And he said he didn't really trust any technology. You always had to have a backup plan, which is fair. Jeff, when Fabian seems to have a clear idea of what you might run private cloud in a data center, what you might take to public cloud. Where are you guys in that journey, I guess? What do you see? Obviously, you're doing some things in public cloud today. You still have a very big broadcast center with on-premise infrastructure. How do you see that going forward?
It's still one big balancing act. I mean, Fabian alluded to a lot of it. You're riding the public internet. That gave birth to a whole nother faction that we have to deal with, and that's information security. Our video is a file just like anybody else's file now. And so there's a whole new group I have to deal with about, oh, you just can't make that connection. You just can't open that port up. So there are a lot of nuances that we have to deal with, public versus private cloud. And look, I grew up doing TV in New York. When you go to that TV and you turn it on, I better be there, or you're not going to stay, and you may never come back. So it's got to work first time, every time. And so there again is the balancing act. Do I trust the cloud? Can I depend on the cloud? And we've got, Paramount Global now has a foot in every cloud provider there is. We're dealing with public, we're dealing with private, and we're trying to weigh where the best pieces are. And don't forget, there's a cost getting in and out of the cloud. Nobody ever talks about that. But it's not free. And if you push a lot of video and a lot of files, the price tag goes up pretty quickly. So again, big balancing act as to which way to go, what makes sense. Today, I'm in agreement with Fabian that live production, local news, I'm probably going to do that in a private cloud or maybe even still on-prem. Editing, which is essentially non-real time, or pre-production, yeah, we could put that up there. We could certainly do that because I've got a chance to go back. There's no do-over in local news. You're either there when it happens or your competition got you.
Gotcha. I have some more questions for these guys, but I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some. If anyone has a question, raise your hand and we'll find you with a mic. By the way, are any of you doing anything new with graphics in terms of your studio presentations? Anything new with augmented reality graphics? I think, Jim, you have a green screen studio in the new facility. How do you see using that?
Yeah, we put the green cyc in a year and a half ago when we first moved in and went live, and we are about to launch a VR AR setup, but we're not quite there yet. It was not the top priority in the first year. But yeah, we're about to go there and dip our toe in the water, and we've got the support of our graphics hub in Florida. They're working on spooling up the expertise in virtual set design and designing graphics for augmented reality support of news.
Right, because feeding that environment with graphics, creating the AR graphics or backgrounds, that's a big part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not something you have at a local station in terms of resources, but you have the graphics hub.
Yeah, we have the resources. They're not on-prem, but we have the resources. Yeah, they're in the cloud. The cloud's in Tampa, but
Gotcha.
For
Where
us, they're in
where
the
it's always
cloud.
sunny. Right. Fabian, what do you see doing new from a graphic presentation point of view in the new building?
Yeah, so we just came off of a lecture night, obviously, and we did a lot of AR there. I hope some of you watched. My team has been very heavily involved with that. Adam Cooper is actually here on my team, is critical to that effort, and Terry Pong and others. Basically, for that, we relied on Stipe for the camera tracking, and if you watched the show, we had the massive video wall on the floor where we could merge the AR with the actual video wall so that the Congress it can come out of the floor in 3D, right? And we had also the video walls around the studio be able to interact with our AR environment. So those kind of things are, for us, only the beginning. I mean, that was obviously a large implementation. We usually don't do that, though, except for those type of events, right? That's election night. That's our Super Bowl, as we always say. So, of course, we really wanted to make sure we told the story as effectively as we possibly could. And for election, that is all about graphics, right? So the question is, going forward in the new facility, how does news utilize AR in an effective way? I think we've just scratched the surface. There's so many things we could do to display content that are traditionally more 2D, graphics inside of the 3D space. And so there's a creativity component to it that's being unlocked. And then the other part is building, again, the studios to be extremely flexible so that we can use them for all types of different productions. So as we all know, when we talk about virtual sets, that's one of the big benefits. So that's certainly our focus, that we build those studios to have very minimal set pieces and lots of LED walls, and incorporating AR into that helps us turn around the show from one show in the morning to something else in the middle of the day to something else in the afternoon. And that's not just for news, but also switching over to sports productions within that same space. So looking at things like ghost frame and being able to use those video walls by having productions be able to have those the nanosecond alignment of the video subframes across. And combining that with the camera shutter, that's the ghost frame technology, to be able to show different images on the same LED wall across different cameras. So again, all of those things to me are really about enabling that flexibility I mentioned and creating as many productions as possible in those studios. And yeah, one thing I just thought of too there is when you build those studios to be that flexible and incorporate AR, it's a different set design question, right? Traditionally, you build a set, you think about the walls, and we ran into this with our election set, the video walls. You then have to make the AR work, and that's sometimes in conflict. So for example, with Ghost Frame, you can actually embed trackers into the video walls that are not visible to the cameras that are using a portion of that, and the others are, the AR cameras, the AR tracking systems are in theory. So those kind of enhancements are also really going to help us create that flexibility.
Okay, thanks. It looks like we're pressing up against lunchtime. I think Michael, a few words to say, Michael and Kathy. I'd like to thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Glenn and everyone. I'm going to ask everyone to stay on stage for just a minute as Kathy Haley is in the audience with a question for Philippe and Frédéric Petitpont of Newsbridge.
I've read that producers spend on average 20% of their time searching for video in the archive. Frédéric and Philippe Petitpont invented Newsbridge to solve that problem. Frédéric, what sets Newsbridge apart from companies that offer AI platforms to index and manage live and archive video?
Hello, everyone. I think AI is just a way to achieve this. Really the promise we have for our users is to find the very little moment they need in less than 2 seconds, whether it's through 40 petabytes of archive or 100 live stream concurrently. And the second thing is what is powering actually this. And this is what we call multimodal AI. It's a way to fusion data. So basically when we got content that is coming, we are different AI pipelines that are kicking in. So we detect person, sound, we apply AI captioning, transcription, logo detection, and we stored all of this in huge search in live memory. So you can have a very quick access to content, and everything is reconciled using a semantic approach. So it means that in a search perspective, you can really search like a plain text search, like a Google search, and get in return not the full file, but the few scenes, the few seconds that exactly are matching your query. And what is very unique is we've been doing a lot of R&D on efficiency. So most neural network we're using are not actually running on GPU. And that could make, I mean, it's crazy, but I mean, we reshape the thing so it can work, so it's very affordable. And I really think here we're making AI business reality in terms of sense, it's semantic, and cost, it's affordable. Last thing is about live, so everything works live. We believe really that the live of today is the archive of tomorrow, and you can get like notify every time there are such queries that are matching live, so it's a very powerful tool for news and press agencies especially.
Thank you. And Philippe, CEO, who's using Newsbridge? What news what organizations?
Thank you, Kathy. Actually, lots of news TV stations are using this solution. We're working in news and sports. Can name some of it. Bloomberg, for example, Sky News, SWR in Germany, TF1 in France. And they are all sharing the same common issue in that, well, they have lots of content, whether if it's in their archive or just about the number of hours they're recording every day. And they are tackling the process, this project in kind of two different ways. Either they are starting by the archive saying, okay, now that I have a good AI indexing technology and a way to find my archive that makes sense to start digitizing my archive. Digitizing without indexing, without even the possibility to find it, there's no money doing that. It's a waste of money. And so they started with that, or either the other way is for them to start with indexing live. And as Fred said, the live of today is tomorrow archive. So let's start indexing now, and then my live is available to everyone with a Google search. That makes new use cases possible, new revenue stream generation, because once your content is findable as simple as a Google search, then you can start reselling the content. That's what we call the media marketplace. And that's a way to generate new revenue, but also to finance an archive digitization project, which is of course very expensive, even if we have a technology to lower that cost as a minimum one to really start having a return on investment as soon as possible. So TV stations, sports, and I mean media companies that have content, of course.
Thanks very much, Philippe and Frédéric, CEO and CTO of Newsbridge. They're right back there. You can go see their stuff. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.